All right, we're going to continue moving along. Patrick has assumed his perch. We're going to have an introduction to I guess this is a new concept, the collaboration lab. So to kick that off, I'm going to introduce Patrick Homer, who you all know, CEO, Federated Sample Corporate, whatever that means, and Jacqueline Rosales, did I pronounce that right? Chief of Operations for Soapbox Sample. Whatever that means.
All right, thanks.
I'm just going to put this here.
So now for the moment you've all been waiting for, right? This is the moment, this is the time. Last summer, last SampleCon, a few short months ago, one of the most productive times we had was when we had very specific sessions, and I'm glad I have a ball now. We had very specific sessions where the buyers got together in a room to talk about buyer issues. We had sellers that got together to talk about seller issues, the quality group, and then the data collection group. And it was collaborative, which is why we came back to that word, and really started to ask the fundamental questions of what do we need to solve for as a sample industry in order to move forward. And this is the output, which is going to be the collaboration labs of actually trying to put some concrete messages, some concrete definitions together around what we did in the last SampleCon. And also try to take it on the road. Our goal for this year is not just to have the echo chamber of this room be the echo chamber, but to take it out to other conferences and other associations to spread the ideas, but also open up the concepts to a much broader group. So we have a deck, which is called the Introduction to Collaboration Labs.
We worked on it for months.
We worked on it for a very long time. I think we just got it finally all together, maybe last night. Slide number 1, you're going to love this first slide. Well, I have to click something, right? Is there a clicker somewhere? I don't even have a clicker. I'll just
even
point.
the equipment.
Snozberries, right? It tastes like snozberries. If you know this movie so very well, I love this phrase, we are the music makers, we are the dreamers of a dream. And I put this up there not just because I love Willy Wonka, but because we're trying to inspire a larger mission than a typical conference environment where we actually feel like we have mutual and group ownership of what's happening next. And inspired by Don this morning to think about that 10x, think about what's possible, not what is hard to do or what we see as impossible today. So let's start with putting our crazy hats on, our chocolate factory hats on. And let's hit another slide. So the biggest challenge I see we're facing in our industry today is we're speaking a lot of different languages. And I'm not just talking about languages, but we define things so very differently. I think I've made the joke about we can't decide on incidents every single SampleCon, right? I have. I've made that joke every time, right? And it gets a decent laugh every time because we all know we have no idea what incidents means. At the same time, we transact on sample and incidents every single day for thousands and thousands of interviews for us, all based on a definition that no one can possibly agree to right now, which seems utterly crazy in my book. And that's just one of many, many definitions or ideas that we have different languages and different agreements on, or lack of agreements on, of what they actually are.
Agree.
All right. Next one. So here are the challenges that we see in buying and selling sample. One is we have disconnected systems to date. Now there's more and more integration going on, but if you think from a historical standpoint, a panel was a separate and distinct infrastructure from a technical and process standpoint than the survey software itself, much less any third-party process that they're going in between, like a router, for example. So we have these very disconnected historical systems. Over the past 3 years, everyone released their APIs, right? We, of course, released our APIs. There's APIs, 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 and they all act differently. Not only are they written differently, they all have different assumptions built in of what incidents might mean, which is a whole different conversation, right? And finally, there's a lack of definitions or protocols around all the elements of these systems fitting together. So topics for the collaboration labs. I did a word cloud, pulling out all the words from how we describe these two labs. But essentially, we're going to attempt to define, as a group of people, certain elements of the sample business that have not been defined before. And secondly, we're going to start trying to understand the value of transparency in the supply chain and the value of defining different types of supply. Who here can define river? I mean, seriously, does anyone have any idea what river actually means? But we all have used that term, like incidents. So we have these two challenges. We have a challenge of definition of what is the different types of supply and who are the suppliers, what does that mean? And then secondly, around the transactions themselves, what is incidence, what is a CPI, what does it mean to calculate length of interview, things like this. And we're going to attempt to actually define some things. Now, we're not trying to say this is the final definition, the absolute definition. This is a starting point, a building block, a foundation to build off of. And we also recognize that there are a lot more people in our industry than those in this room. And so that's why we want to take it out of these four walls and start getting more information back. So we'll talk about this a little bit more tomorrow afternoon after we've come together and look at some of these definitions or ideas. But there'll be an opportunity for all of us here to actually take these ideas and fundamental definitions from the collaboration labs on the road with us. So if you're interested in participating in that process, the floor is very much yours to do so. So that's the idea. And then the actual how we're going to do it, I leave to Ms. Rosales.
Thanks, Patrick. So I'm curious, of you sitting out there, who participated in our group collaboration lab discussions last year? Okay. And who felt that those were good conversations where we opened up a lot of different topics in conversation? Less than that attended, interesting. And then who felt that after we had those conversations and we opened up those doors that we did something meaningful with the outcome of those conversations? Exactly, that's why we're having them again. So our goal this year is to have these conversations, simplify them a little bit so that we have some actual takeaways. So as we were looking at how we were going to keep this conference collaborative for the use of redundancy, right? We really wanted to understand how we tackle all of these big issues, but we start small, right? So today we talked about device agnostic, we talked about transparency, we talked about security. Dawn says, well, shouldn't every interaction be counted as a complete? I would love that, right?
It's a good revenue model.
So we had all these conversations, but what we're going to do today in these labs and tomorrow in these labs is kind of go back to the basics so that in order to get to the bigger picture items, we can actually start talking the same language. So we all know Patrick is obsessed with incidents, so let's talk about incidents. Let's talk about what these different sample sources are. What do they mean? What do these words mean? What do these terms mean? So that when people are asking questions like, well, how do you blend your sample? And someone says, well, I use, X, Y, Z. The problem is that how people define X, Y, Z is differently. So if we click, it's like virtual clicking. You'll see what we've done is we took all of the conversation from last year, which if you were here, you may remember was on big pieces of white paper, right, that all got put up on a wall. Once those white papers were taken down and brought back to the office and someone took a look at what all of those meant, it was all very confusing, right? Because it made sense at the time, but then when you took it away, it's like, what the heck does all this mean? But what we were able to do was to narrow it down to say, hey, what it looks like is that there's two big questions or two big topics that make sense for us to tackle this year, which is how we came up with the two different tracks, which are protocols and transparency. We get that there are lots of other topics that we could include and we could have in these groups. I will tell you that there was even some background discussion as sessions were happening today. We were like, oh no, should we change them, right? Should we talk about something else because everybody's really interested in this? And then we realized, no, we need to go back to these, we really do need to go back to these basics. So we've got two sessions and we have two tracks. So who here, when they checked in, noticed the letter that they have on their badge? Who here was concerned about that letter?
I was
I will tell you, the people with the D's were super concerned, right? So there was an A, B, C, D, and there was a lot of questions from the D's, right? Like, why do I have a D? There was really no A's, like, why do I have an A, right? They're like, I'm an A, right? No, and nobody understood what it meant, but yet there was like concern over what this was. So our goal was, Patrick mentioned last year, we had buyers in a room, we had sellers in a room, we had quality people in a room, and we had technology in a room. So what happened is the buyers were like, well, our world would be great if the sellers would do this different, right? And the sellers were like, well, if the buyers would just listen to this, we'd be fine. And then we'd all say, well, if those dang technology companies would make things easier for us, right, it would be fine. And the technology companies were saying, well, all these buyers and sellers are asking us to do all of this different stuff. And then the quality people are like, well, we still need to think about data quality. So this year we mixed everybody up into the same room so that we don't get cliquey in our own little groups, right? And actually get something accomplished. So that's why you have a letter. It was fairly random, with the exception of if we ended up with 10 people from the same company, we mixed you up. People have been very concerned today about whether they have to stay within their designated letter, right? So maybe you really just don't like me, right? And you don't want to come to my session. So we ask that you try to stay within your groups. We're not going to issue you a ticket if you do not, but there was some method behind that madness of mixing the folks up. So if you're in protocols, you're either going to be with the Patrick Richard team or you're going to be with the Jacqueline Todd team. We will rate that, so you can tell me whether my session was better than Patrick's, just for our own personal conversations later.
Man.
And then if you're, for the transparency, you're either with Bonnie and Andy or Mende and Mark. The good news is last year you had to pick. Like if you were a buyer and a seller, you're like, well, which conversation do I go to? So this year we've made it, if you're assigned to one conversation today, you get to be in the other conversation tomorrow. So therefore, everybody gets an opportunity to share with us. I'm curious as we talk about, today we talked about a lot of really big things that were happening. And we're bringing these labs back to be a little bit simpler, right? And talk back about sample, which is what our conference is about. You may have heard or seen some of the advertising for the conference that talked all about that respondent, right? So sometimes we remember to talk about that respondent and sometimes we forget. But thinking about sample and thinking about respondents, curious how many people here are either brand new to the industry or their company is new to this space within the last 3 years. Great. So can I have my ball, please?
Oh, you like it, don't you? The ball.
So
works.
can I see those people again? I'm going to go to you because you're closest. And I have on heels, so that it all factors into it. So here's my challenge. So some of us, this is for you now, so some of us have been in this industry for a long time. I know you're thinking, she couldn't have been there that long, right? No, just kidding. So 20 years, right? And we have grown up, right, in research, and we grew up in online. And we came from phone, and we came from face-to-face, and we came from mail. And we came from all of these different places, and we continue to try to solve our problems ourselves over and over. And we forget to look at the new faces in the crowd who are driving changes in sample. There are brand new companies. I personally, now I could be wrong, someone will call me out, but I don't see a lot of new phone centers opening up. I don't see a lot of new face-to-face places. There's all these brand new companies in research. And they are the ones that are driving how we buy and sell sample. They're driving the respondent pool. They're creating these new names and new definitions for us. Like we all focus forever on, double opt-in panel. And now that's a word that in my life actually never gets said by itself. It's like, well, we have double opt-in panel and, all of these other things. So you now have it, and all the new people out here have that. Please help with the space in the industry, pass this on, move it along, and help us get to that next step. A lot of people, when talking about the labs, also said, well, what are you going to do with this information after? Because as you saw, everyone's hand went down, right, when we said, was there anything useful here? Mm-hmm. So we have a couple of next steps. So once this is all done, we will actually compile the information and deliver it in a report sort format so that everybody can see what happened. Because even though you'll get to do both protocols and transparency, you won't be in both protocol sessions and both transparency sessions. But we'll compile that information and we'll put it out there for you to read, criticize, give feedback, do all of those things that as researchers we do so well. And then we've also started the conversation industry-wide with industry organizations who are also great at bringing people together and helping to provide legitimacy and open discussions to be able to work with them. So we as a sample industry get a voice within those other stages, if you will, to carry this conversation out so that in 2015, we work on some definitions and what's next and what's important. And by 2016, we ideally have something in place different from what we have in place now. I don't know what that's going to be because that hasn't come out. But there will be a diligent group, if you will, of individuals working to continue that conversation. And we ask as a group that if you are interested in continuing that conversation, or you feel it's important, or you want to be a part of it, you let us know, because there's no way we can be in every single place all the time, having every conversation with every person. It's just, we actually have other jobs too. So we need everybody's help here. Does anyone have questions? Do we want to add anything else about the sessions? They're 60 minutes. You're going to do some writing. So you're going to have some index cards. We're going to ask you to write some stuff down. And we're going to collect those. We're going to be able to have all that information. There'll be open Q&A. We're going to pick on you if you don't talk. One of the big feedback pieces we got last year was some people dominated the group. And it was because others, some people, like, what's incidence? What's incidence? I'm just teasing Patrick. However,
oh man,
he's never going to ask me to talk with him again, right?
Never. This is the last time.
Yeah, I plan it that way. It's all
first and last.
It's all part of my goal. But if you have any questions about the sessions, please let us know. And you know, we'll kind of leave you with this: is that the part of the opening conversation, you know, talked about the 3 different kinds of people, right? So there's the people who make it happen, and there's the people who watch it happen, and there's the people that said, what the hell happened? So I would challenge all of us to be in that first group of the people that make it happen and start to actually move things forward.
Seriously, any questions before we break? Ooh, they don't have, it's on.
If you flip it over, your secret code is on the back.
Did it work? Ooh.
Now, if you have no code and you have nothing on the front, you pick who you like best. And you go.
Jacqueline.
I'm not sure. Rachel's going to answer your question.
If you don't have a letter on your card, we apologize. And if this happens at registration desk on your way out, they will put you into the group that you were.
Any other questions, or do we get to break early for a longer break?
So we are going to break now. We're going to just still take the 15-minute break, but regroup 15 minutes early. So at 2:45, everyone will go to their rooms so that we can get you all out of here and get you happy hour and enjoying your evening and networking.
In your signs, in your program book too, it tells you which group is in which room. And then also, to make it even just super, super easy, the sign outside the room has your letter on it.
So we're meeting back at 2:45.
2:45
In the rooms.
In the rooms, 2:45 in the rooms.